And the debate took place within the Jewish community. If we move away from, synagogue, what will happen to Judaism? Oh no, it'll be more vibrant because it will be grappling with the real world. And Judaism then became whatever, welfare reform, global warming, whatever the issues of the day were. When that debate took place in the American Jewish community, the pessimists, the ones who said faith should be at the core, however marginal it may seem to the real world that we live in and all of the suffering that goes on, that we have some moral obligation and some biblical obligation to address. They said, this is going to be terrible. As they predicted the dire consequences of a Judaism that moved from Torah to Tikkun Olam, their views were preposterously optimistic, viewed retrospectively. Jews had a 5-6% intermarriage rate when suffocating ancient Bible with old men telling you what rules to follow was Judaism. Instead of, hey, let's help the poor, let's help the environment, hey, let's create world peace. That's what Judaism is. We now have an intermarriage rate of 75-80%. And demographically, we are disappearing as a people. The first generation of Jews, it was like having your cake and eating it too. Hey, I could be a Jew and by God, I could be out there dealing with the world. But here was the problem. Their kids and their kids suddenly realized, why do I have to go to that boring old synagogue? I can just go in to sign up in the Democratic Party or in some environmental group or Acorn or any one of those things. Same story with the mainline churches. Hollow at the core. Disappearing, membership disappearing. Look at Europe's churches. However strange it may seem to others who don't share your faith, to think of Jesus as a figure who's ever present in your life, whose word you are looking to serve him. It's hard to defend once you get outside the enclave. People make jokes about it. And you don't want to be locked up in an enclave. You want to go out into the real world. It's so seductive to say, well, let me show what being a Christian is, and being a Christian is stopping global warming, stopping poverty, stopping this. And that's what the mainline churches went to do. The first generation, it was extraordinary. People went to church and they felt connected to the world in ways they never had before. And their kids stopped going to church. And we were left with a world where we were the center. We weren't looking to serve someone. It was all about, the whole world was inside our own heads. And while people don't have to be religious to care, my wife's a good example. She's the most decent human being I've ever known. And she purports at least not to believe in this mumbo jumbo of God or anything like that. She pulls it off. But as you look at societies, as you look at what Nietzsche said, that when God dies, he's replaced by gods of politics who really let the rivers of blood flow. Let me tell you the best thing I can say about Christianity and why I want you to be so robust in the world of my grandchildren. Let's assume God was not dead as the 20th century dawned. Let's assume Nietzsche was wrong in thinking that the Christian God had lost his viability. Evil, ambitious people would have gone to where the action was. If the action was the church, that's where they would have headed. And a guy named Lenin would have looked at the Eastern Orthodox Church and said, this is the route to power, and he would have been Bishop Lenin. He might have been Pope Lenin of the Eastern Orthodox Church. And people would be saying, look at that hypocritical church. Here's Pope Lenin with all of his Christian whatnots, and he used his power to kill 20,000 people. And he would have. No doubt about it. Let me tell you the glory of your faith. As Pope Lenin, with all the power at his command, he could have killed 20,000 people. As Commissar Lenin, he easily killed 60 million people. There's something in that faith that inhibits us, doesn't turn us perfect, but it makes us better. And it makes the world a better place. Now, how do you keep that faith vibrant? How do you stop it from being displaced by politics? Do you lock yourself up in a little room and don't let the world intrude? Is Christianity nothing but a process of self-purification? I hope not. What you say is, look, there are some issues. Look, first thing you say is, look, because I'm a Christian, I ought to care about all sorts of things around me. It makes me a better person, and I'm going to be an active Democrat, an active Republican, an active liberal, an active conservative. I'm going to be for the global warming bill. I'm going to be against the global warming bill, because these are important things. And I hope people who are religious tend to care about these things. They ought to as citizens. But they don't say the church takes one side on this issue, which is what the mainline churches did, which is what Judaism to so great a degree did, which is what the Catholic Church is doing right now, and which is what the evangelical community has not done. Well, there's a little footnote to that, and we'll talk about that. What you do then is you have to say there are some issues that are so important to me as a Christian that I must risk my faith, this precious, often fragile gift that I have, because I have no alternative but to risk my very faith and to bring the church in with all it has on this issue. You must do that from time to time. And the question then is, what are the issues? How do you pick them where you make a difference and keep your faith alive and vibrant? I think Wilberforce had the answer. He's a great hero of mine. I think William and Catherine Booth, who founded the Salvation Army, had the answer. They are great heroes. They found issues which nobody else cared about. Human rights issues, protecting the vulnerable, that nobody really cared about. And they found them and shaped them in a way where people on the left and people on the right of their time could join with them. Didn't always happen, but they did. And they made a difference with those issues. They didn't get involved in the issue as a Christian church about whether taxes should be high or low, although there are strong arguments that higher taxes, some people think, hurt the poor, some people help the poor, and we have an obligation to care for the poor because we are people of faith. But they were very careful about not getting in issues because those issues were being debated within the society. And you had as many people on one side gave as good as it got. They didn't substitute Christianity for the politics of the day, important as the politics of the day may have been. And that's the sort of thing that I want the American Christian community to look at, and where I think the National Association of Evangelicals just came out with this manifesto, which says, hey, as Christians, there's not an issue we shouldn't be caring about and dealing with. I've told Ron Sider, my dear friend, you are jeopardizing the faith you love by going down that road. What is there arrogance or ignorance on your part in thinking that evangelicals will escape the fate of the mainline churches or the Jewish community, which went down that road Doesn't that tell you something? If the next meeting of the National Association of Evangelicals, the agenda is going to be global warming, immigration policy, tax policy, welfare reform policy, do you think that's going to make for a more vibrant evangelical community? The answer that Ron gives me, the answer that Richard Cizik gives me is yes. Our young people just love it. And they're even more committed in going to church. And you know my answer to that? You're right. The first generation, that's what happens. But their kids and their kids' kids, if they see Christianity as something that's the Democratic Party platform, or frankly the Republican Party platform, they're just going to cut straight to the chase and leave the middleman out and go straight into Democratic and Republican Party politics. That's where you're headed. Now, one other point, and it's critical. Why are some of these evangelicals in the National Association of Evangelicals driven in the direction they are to care about all these politically correct issues? Partly because they think they're good policy, but I know there's another part. They are sick and tired of being identified with the seeming small-mindedness of the so-called Christian right, which talks about gay marriage, abortion, pornography, as if that's what Christianity's about. Now, I care deeply about the issue as it happens of gay marriage for reasons we can talk about, and I'm against it. I think limits on pornography are important. I'm even being reached, sort of, more and more, for sure, on the issue of abortion. But it is the whole approach of the evangelical, of the traditional evangelical community. Richard Land, my friend, who is the chief, when he heads up the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission of the Southern Baptist Convention, just gave a speech to the Southern Baptist Convention. Excuse me. And he made this thundering speech about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse: gay marriage, abortion, pornography, and radical Islam. And raw, the crowds cheered. And I said, Richard, I sent him an email, which I'm happy to distribute. What a disgrace. You know better. The Southern Baptist Convention is declining in membership. You're losing your hold on the young people. You can do better than playing to the crowd. And let me tell you something. You want to know how to get more people to join you on, say, the issue of abortion? I'll tell you how. I'll tell you one way not to do it. By calling my wife a baby killer. That ain't going to get you real far. If you want to get my wife to accept Jesus, do you say, you heathen, come, let me tell you the truth? Why do you think you're going to reach my wife, who's a doctor, who stays up till 1 o'clock in the morning reading the New England journals so she can save her patients, and makes half as much money, darn it, as she otherwise might, because she wants to spend time with her patients, and is the most loving mother there is? Call her a baby killer? And yet that's the kind of rhetoric that comes out here. And that's the message that is projected in this 4 horsemen, red meat type speech. You want to know how to deal with that? I'll tell you how. Why don't you go to my wife and say, listen, I care deeply about this issue because as a Christian, I care about vulnerable human beings. And it makes me sad to think that you don't share my view that a fetus is a vulnerable human being. But please let me tell you something. I care about the abortion issue for the same reason I'm deeply involved in the trafficking of women, the slavery issue of our time, in prison rape. 20% of American men are in prison by some counts. Maybe it's lower. Rape. About AIDS in Africa. See it in those terms. Maybe you don't agree with me. Let's keep talking about it. Seems to me, I'm no Christian, seems to me that's a much more Christian way of approaching the issue of abortion than calling my wife a baby killer and, raising the arm. But I come back to something else. Richard really doesn't have confidence in some way that he can reach people like my wife. So, and it isn't true of Richard, but it's surely true of some Christians. They prefer being in the enclave, just us. We're all pure and good. We don't want to be corrupted by that world. Let me tell you something, Marvin, that I discovered about Christians who are the ones I admire and who are effective. Marvin is one of them. Chuck Colson's another one. Here's what it is. And you, unlucky young people, have probably been good Christians all your lives. You're unlucky. You know why? Because it's easier for you to go in the enclave. You're scared of the real world out there. You're more, you can be put down a lot more easily. Whereas people who've come to their Christianity later in their lives and have earned it, they can deal with the real world and hold on to their faith. They really have a core faith that they've earned, that nothing is going to stop. Yours is much more fragile because it hasn't come under challenge, because you've just lived it and been brought up that way. And I think a lot of people in the abortion movement are that way. They just want to just us, and they don't think they can persuade others. There's another aspect of it that's really insidious, and that's true of left and right in politics in America, by the way. It's called direct mail. These groups get their money by sending out these letters. You think Gary Bauer, who cares about all these Wilberforce issues that I work on? The trafficking issue, the AIDS issue. There's another issue that I'm going to get deeply involved in, fistula. In Africa, 3 to 4 million women who were forced to marry at age 12, who have female clitoridectomies in their scar tissue. The baby comes down the birth canal, it's narrow, starts banging its head, tears a hole in the birth canal. The baby dies, and the woman is a pariah in the village, incontinent, defecating. But listen, hey, there's a world out there through their vaginas, and they're pariahs in their own village, and it takes $300 to cure it, to sew up the hole, and 4 million women suffer from it in parts of Africa. And I want to organize an effort to deal with that. And it as part of the same sort of sentiment that got to the AIDS in Africa thing. And there's another bill where third world prisons, if we could use our power to force them to put tarpaulins above courtyards during the rainy season, we'd probably save 50,000 lives a year in prisons in parts of Africa, where it won't even cost money. It's that nobody cares about prisoners. We could use our influence to do it. Those are the issues that don't risk your faith, because you can bring in people who are Democrats and Republicans, liberals and conservatives. You're not on one side of the ledger or not. It's an issue that shatters caricatures, because it shows that on the issues where people disagree with you, that you come from it, you come at it from what I would say is a Christian perspective. But let me get back to the direct mail campaigns. You can raise a lot of money by saying the baby killers are at the gates. Please, they're about to take over the world. Send me a check for $25. And if you go from being 50% of the American people support to 40% because suburban mothers who are not religious say, oh my God, I wouldn't want my children near an evangelical Christian. Still 40% of the American people, 30% of the American people, 20% of the American people, 10% of the American people writing you checks for $25, you've got millions of bucks coming in. Now it works the other way. The left is out there saying these Christians want to put you all in concentration camps, these Christian right bigot fascists. Send me $20. They do the same. And these forces are out there splitting us apart. My thesis is America has more in common with itself, red and blue and religious and secular and Jewish and Christian and black and white America has more in common with itself than Move On or Pat Robertson wants us to know. And I want Christian leadership teaching us that. But if Richard Land's making his Four Horsemen speech, the crowd will go wild and he'll be immediately temporarily popular playing to that crowd. He'll lose his young, as the Southern Baptist Convention is declining in membership. And he's going to set Richard Cizik to go tell the kids on Christian campuses to go fight for global warming. So that the New York Times, and now leaders of the National Association of Evangelicals have had, in the last 6 months, admiring profiles in the New York Times, Vanity Fair, and the New Yorker magazine. It feels good to be admired. Boy, so I am saying, in answer to your question, take a look at what Wilberforce did. Be very attentive to defining yourself and not letting others define you. Understand that politics is seductive and corrupting, but understand that us against them demonization of the other side is not very Christian and won't succeed. And find issues. Don't just stay in your church and pray for your salvation. You have a Christian obligation to make the world a better place. But figure out ways to do it that teach us that we are together. And there are those issues. And don't simply say, I care about these issues, and sign letters. Because that doesn't count, as I told you. What counts is the priority you attach to them. Ron Sider, my dear friend, who has Prism Magazine, as the people in Sojourner Truth House will tell you, his magazine, Prism Magazine, contributed to this debate over trafficking in incredible ways. What they published mugshot photos of girls arrested in Denver for prostitution. I want everybody to look at them, by the way. And it was a series of 8 photographs taken of these girls about whom we make jokes. Pimp and hoe jokes get made on TV. The Academy Award went to the song that glorified pimps 2 years ago, the Oscar win. You take a look at these photos. You cannot tell, these are photos taken over a space of from 1 to 3 years, generally for a little less than 2 years. You cannot tell that the girl in photo 1 is the same person as the one in photo 8. So savage is the destruction of these slaves. This is the slavery issue of our time. Women are as blacks were. And this is the issue. And Ron knows this, and his magazine did it. And I'd get Ron to sign letters that I'd write. But then, 2 issues later, as the election was coming, Ron does a 3,000-word essay on what issues we, as progressive evangelicals, must care about. And the issues that he listed was the Democratic Party platform, and guess what wasn't there? The trafficking issue. He didn't think about it. It's not that he doesn't care. He does. But hey, when the big time comes, our issues are, what the New York Times considers important. You'd be horrified to think it, but it's partly true. Our issues are the issues that allow us to separate from those Christian right types out there that are so caricaturing who we are. Hey, if we care about trafficking issue, nobody's going to listen. Press doesn't care about that issue. We won't have an audience. We won't have a platform. Well, I really zinged Ron hard in an email, and he's so embarrassed about it. And oh my God, Mike, I really care. Watch what I will do. But the larger message to Ron is, if this is your notion of Christianity, your sons, and surely your grandchildren, ain't going to go to church. And you better understand that. But I will say that that Christianity will be defined by bracelet, or would Jesus drive an SUV, will be the expression of Christianity. If you get the guys who are making the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse type speeches and calling my wife a baby killer and defining issues in terms of us against them issues, as if that's what Christian witness in the world is really about. Find those issues for rape, as Wilberforce did, for rape prisoners, for people in the gulags of North Korean prison camps, for people in Sudan, for women with fistula, for people with AIDS. Bush tried to do it, sort of. He never got it, by the way, Marvin. He never got it. And I'll tell you where Bush failed. Here was this, and he's such a decent man. And I've been to Midland, Texas, where the Christian community is as no other community. You know Deborah Fikes of Midland. I mean, she is, you ought to get her as somebody, because she represents to this outsider what Christianity is at its ultimate. She is such a loving, decent person who gets up quietly and prays at 4 o'clock in the morning. She doesn't talk about it, she does it. And they give away their money to charity, and they care, and so forth. That's the Midland, Texas community that was there. Well, some of us wrote a letter to Bush saying, you know, they're demonizing you for being a Christian. You have a responsibility to define yourself, not to let others do it. And here's what we suggest. I forget, did you sign that letter, Marvin? Yeah, Marvin signed it. It was me and Marvin and Mary Ann Glendon and Robbie George and Al Moeller and Amy Cass. So we had 2 Protestants, 2 Catholics, 2 Jews. And we said to Bush, remember what John Kennedy did when he was elected president? You know, there was this fear that Catholics are taking over. So he made a speech to the Baptist Convention of Houston saying, let me define myself. You got to do the same, Mr. Bush. Now, of course, Kennedy had an easy job. He went to the Baptist. He said, yes, I'm a Catholic, but don't worry, it has no impact whatsoever on anything I do or believe. That was his speech. If you read it, it's really quite remarkable. We said, huh?
And he was honest.
And he was honest about it, yes. Partly. I mean, he was still. Here's the speech we wanted him to make. In Europe, yes, I'm a Christian. And it is at the core of who I am. But now let me say a few things. First, to be a Christian means never to impose my faith on others. It's a gift that I have received. It would be unimaginable and the opposite of everything I hold dear to try and impose it. Remember, here were people saying, Bush is president, he's going to force us all to be Christians or throw us in concentration camps. People were saying that in Germany quite openly. Politicians were saying it. And Bush just sat there silently as they did. Second, I care about things like trafficked women and, you know, human rights and promotion of democracy, partly because I am a Christian. It has instructed me. But you can be an atheist and care just as deeply as I do. You don't have to be a Christian. And then he could have said a third thing. Many sins have been committed in the name of Christianity. Easter Sunday pogroms, you name it. We don't profess perfection. But please also understand that democracy is in significant part a gift that came from the Judeo-Christian faith that taught, didn't always live up to it, but taught better than we often give ourselves credit for, this radical message that we're all equal in the eyes of God, the ultimate message that destroys every dictatorship. That's what Christianity is. And by the way, I'm a Christian. You know what it means to be a Christian? It means to the first guy to sew a yellow patch on your arm when they come for the Jews. That's what some righteous Gentiles did, of course, as you know, during the Holocaust. That was the speech I wanted Bush to make, and he never did. So he allowed others to define what it means to be a Christian. It means to be some guy who wants to shoot them up and go to war and kill people for oil. He allowed, and bigoted against anybody who isn't a Christian and ready to throw them in some jail because they aren't Christian. And that's what half of Europe believes what it is to be a Christian. Phooey on Bush for not doing it. Phooey on your leaders for allowing others to define you and your faith. And phooey on those leaders particularly because you are confronting that bias and caricature as you come out into the world from your Christian college, from your Christian community at home, and it's going to be one big damn slap in the face when you get out there. And they're going to say, you're a Christian? Wait a minute. Where are the horns on you? How could you possibly be a Christian? You like music. You like, you go to the movies. You're Christian? Nah, you can't be. That's what Marvin's generation of Christian leaders, that's the box they put you young people into. Don't let them do it, and don't you do it. That's, because if they do, if that's what it means to be a Christian, people will flee from it, ultimately. And others, like the National Association of Evangelicals, will march your faith down exactly the road that the mainline churches have marched down. I am for finding a way of dealing with the world in ways that shatter caricatures and in ways that don't unduly risk the substitution of your faith for politics. And I see both trends happening, and I can tell you as an outsider, you're child's play. I mean, the sort of naivete of earnest young Christian kids, I see them. I mean, Marvin's more tough-minded about these things, so you're probably getting a better education, I'm certain you are, than at many of the Christian colleges I have visited and seen. But you're not ready to march out into the world and shape it. It's going to be very, very difficult for you. But God, what a mission it is. And you better do it for the sake of my grandchildren.
So let's see, that was one answer to one question. But we've gone a little bit over, but let's take a couple more.
Yeah, I'll be short in my answers.
Yes, Chris?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for that answer. I think, I'm not sure how familiar you are with the King's vision, with the goal of the King's education, but it is to do exactly that. It's to be informed on these national issues through our faith, but not only, not screaming, but
Sometimes you gotta scream.
not
Hey,
be the
there's
four
nothing
horsemen thing, but not to be some holy huddle in the basement of the Empire State Building. So I think you'll find that most of the people in this room are very much in agreement with you, very much are pursuing
Right.
what you're talking about. And I already asked you this earlier, but maybe if you could elaborate for everybody now, like started writing, things like that.
How you can really do it. Okay, you're ready to face all the cynics who think you're a Christian. You must be some creepy bigot. You want to shape the world, but not at the expense of witness to Jesus. You don't think every issue of politics where good people, when you see issues where good Christians can be on both sides of the issue, you get pretty reluctant to define it as in one side, as the Christian side of the debate. All this is true. You're ready to do it. What do? How do you engage the world? You heard what I said about Kissinger. When you get into the real world, you don't gain political capital, you spend it. And therefore, your job is to be able to be shrewd and strategic about it in the ways I talked about at the beginning, what I learned when I was in student politics and in the worlds that I've been in. I'll tell you a story about how I got involved in my big shot job in the Reagan administration. There was this obscure professor who wrote an article saying why we will always remain Democrats. And it was in an obscure magazine. This professor said, look, I see what liberals are doing in terms of destroying the poor, in terms of indifference to values, indifference to the middle class, indifference to protecting American interests towards the Soviet Union, and it's all terrible. But I'll never be a Republican. They're a bunch of country club types, and it's just terrible. And I just read the article, and I called up the professor, and I said, look, let me tell you, I'm a Republican. And I've been a Republican, I guess at the time, for 4 years. I became a Republican on the day, to show you how old I am, Jimmy Carter got elected. And I had punched every ticket. I was a civil rights law professor in Mississippi. I was a good Democrat, like we all were supposed to be. And but I didn't believe that stuff anymore, as I told you. And there was Carter getting elected, and I wanted a job in the administration. And all my friends were getting jobs. And so I picked up the phone to start to call so that maybe I could be a deputy assistant secretary in the Commerce Department or something. And halfway through the call, I said, this is a lie. I don't believe this anymore. I don't share these views anymore. I didn't vote for the guy. Hung up the phone and took the most astonishing act of my life. Went out, registered as a Republican, and signed my name to the card. At the time, I was the only Republican I knew. But I thought I was taking myself out of the running because I wasn't going to live a lie anymore. And I told this to this professor, and I said, you know, being a conservative, there really are intellectuals and caring people just like we thought we were caring people. In fact, they're more caring because they're quieter about it. But I'm just telling you, this is an extraordinary world. And I found it fascinating to be a conservative. I can take an opinion now. I don't have to scratch my ear this way anymore. I can just go straight and scratch my ear this way. And we talked some more, this professor and I. And she said to me, okay, listen, stop talking. Go write an article.